Welcome to the Lindsay Hadley Podcast Show. I'm coming to you from the North Shore of Oahu, where weekly I interview some of the world's most inspiring people from business, philanthropy, and entertainment. I love collecting humans, and these are some of my favorites I've found along the way. This podcast is brought to us by Capita Financial Network.
Do you need help with the next steps of your financial plan? Think Capita. Capita is a financial network built around you. They have a team of financial advisors, CPAs, estate attorneys, Medicare providers, and Social Security experts to help you accomplish your financial goals. Call or schedule a complimentary consultation at 801-566-5058 or visit their website at capitafinancialnetwork.com. You can also check out their financial education podcast, The Financial Call, available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and YouTube.
Hi, welcome to the Lindsay Hadley Show, brought to you by Capital Financial Network. I'm so thrilled to have a very cool guest on my show today, Brian Smith, who, for those of you who don't know, I'm married to an Australian from Queensland, Jeff Hadley, and we have 3 little boys that are all dual citizens that are Australians, and we've lived there off and on and traveled there every year. And Brian is originally from Australia, which I'm so excited, and one of the best known brands globally, probably when it comes to retail, the world knows out of Australia. Brian is the founder of the company UGG, which almost every one of my friends from Utah is rocking all year long, not just in the winter. I've got some fun stories to talk with Brian. I've got some fun stories to talk with you about all this. But Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks for being here with us.
My pleasure, Lindsay. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Oh, mate. Well, it's so good. I'm going to call you mate because I'm going to use my Aussie vernacular now.
Come on, mate. There we go.
So, Brian, you're now living in Encinitas, California. You've had an incredible career. You started out in Australia. What part of Australia are you from originally?
I grew up on the East Coast near Sydney. And when I was in my very early 20s, I moved to Perth for 10 years and then came over here.
I love Perth. I in my early career, I put on a music festival in Perth, Australia. We had an event during the Commonwealth Dignitary World Meeting where the Prime Minister of Australia at the time was Julia Gillard, participated in. We raised a bunch of money for polio eradication, and I got to spend some time back and forth on that side of the country. But I've mostly been the East Coast girl too, the Queensland area. But I love that you're a surfer. I live on the North Shore of Oahu, and we're big time surfers.
Oh, wow.
My family loves, and I should say big time. We're big time into it. My son has actually gotten really good the last few years, and he surfs at Pipeline, some of the best surf in the world. And
oh my God, that's pretty courageous.
It's really brave. It makes me nervous, but luckily he goes when it's a little smaller. He doesn't go in the really big stuff. But some of our friends are pros, and I work in that industry, and it's so fun to connect with you. So, Brian, why don't you share with our audience a little bit of your story and how you ended up selling UGGs, which I believe was to Decker Outdoor Corporation. And this was in the 90s. And then later you've gotten into now writing and keynote speaking and other investment and opportunities. I'd love to kind of hear the trajectory of your story from your own mouth. It'd be so fun to hear it.
Well, we'll just skim through it because it's, 20 years of building that brand before I sold it. And how it started out, I spent 10 years training to become an accountant, a chartered accountant, and which is like a CPA here. And the day I graduated, I quit because I hated accounting. And I was, hanging around in Perth, wondering what I could do. And I'd started meditation back then. I bought a book on yoga, and that sort of led into meditation. And I was thinking one morning in this meditation, what am I going to do? And I thought, I got all these goosebumps, and I thought, oh my God, all the big trends are coming out of California, like Levi jeans and waterbeds and, all the surf brands and things. So I thought, I'm going to go to California. I'm going to find the next big thing and bring it back to Australia.
Smart.
Yeah. Within a few weeks, I arrived at LAX. I had a surfboard and my suitcase, and I rented a little house in Santa Monica and rented a van and drove straight to Malibu because I'd been reading about that in surf magazines all my life. It was like my mecca. And I spent a couple of months up there not finding the next big thing until about October, after about 4 or 5 months. October, November, the water was getting really cold and the wind had got cold, and I finished surfing and I was pulling on my sheepskin boots on the beach, and I just had this bolt of, this goosebump moment again, and I thought, oh my God, there are no boots in America. And I knew that 1 in 2 Australians had some sort of sheepskin footwear. So I looked at my buddy Doug and just said, hey, man, we got to go into business. We're going to be instant millionaires. And every entrepreneur's felt that, So anyway, the bottom line is we arranged to bring boots in from this distributor in Western Australia, Country Leather, and Doug was going to be the salesman. So he went on the road with these samples and came back a week later with about 150 business cards of every shoe retailer and not a single order. And he said, Brian, they tell me we're crazy selling sheepskin in California. And it sounds sort of plausible, but I knew Australia's climate's identical to San Diego, where I live. And I thought, that can't be right. And I thought, how come all my friends at Malibu think this is the best idea in the world? And it struck me that, oh my God, so many of them went to Australia on their surf trips and they bought 4 or 5 pairs of boots back for their buddies. So within the surf market, it was really, really well known.
Mhm.
So Doug and I switched gears, like every entrepreneur, when you hit a wall, you have to sort of figure a way around. Everybody says pivoting now, which is what we did. And we said, okay, let's go to the surf shop. So I remember Doug made me go on the road this time. So I remember driving from Santa Monica down to, I think it was Con Surfboards in Santa Monica. And I walked in and I was really sheepish. I had this little bag of samples and I opened it up and he goes, oh man, UGG boots. They're great. What are you doing with those? And I said, well, I'm thinking of importing them into America. And he goes, oh, my God, that's fantastic. You'll make a fortune. They're the best. I've got a pair, And then I went to the next store and the next store. They all said the same thing, So by the time Doug and I got back to Santa Monica a week later, we realized we were really going to make millions, But it never occurred to us that we hadn't asked for an order because we didn't have any inventory, right? So we didn't bother asking for orders. So anyway, now we knew we needed inventory. So by a fluke, my roommate overheard us saying we needed capital, and he had some friends at his work, that were looking to invest. So we raised about 20 grand, which in today's money is about 80,000. So it was a lot of money. And we sent 15 down to Australia and ordered 500 pairs of boots. And they arrived back in Santa Monica like the first week of December, and we stacked them all in the third bedroom in my house and packed up our duffel bags and our vans, and we headed back out to the surf shops. And I remember going back down to Con Surfboards, and I walked in with this huge bag of product and an order pad, and I said, "Okay, Jim, how many do you want?" And he goes, "Oh, Brian, well done, man, but we couldn't sell them in our store. We just sell flip-flops and surfboards and trunks, and they're way too expensive for us. You'd do great in the shoe stores." And I thought, uh-oh. And the next store, "Oh, well done, Brian, but they're way too expensive for us. We just sell surfboards and bikinis and trunks, and you'll do great in the shoe store." And so this happened all the way down the coast, the month of December. And when we tallied up our orders for the first year's sales, which was December 31, it turned out to be 28 pairs, exactly $1,000. And it was like devastating. And so obviously Doug couldn't get paid on 28 pairs of boots, so he got another job, and I was sort of stuck. That would be a good time to give up then, but I still had 400 and something, 80 pairs in my warehouse and all my investors' money tied up. So the long and short of it is I figured out a way to keep going. But the benefit of what happened there is, and I've started a lot of businesses since, is I ended up writing a book called The Birth of a Brand, and it's a roadmap for entrepreneurs. And I used the whole UGG story from the day I arrived till the day I sold the company. And the theme of the book is that you can't give birth to adults, right? If you look at the Wall Street Journal stock exchange page, every single one of those companies probably started with $1,000 sales, right? Now, 30 years later, they're all, mega millions. But every business starts with someone conceiving the idea and then taking action. So action, the birth of UGG was buying 6 pairs of samples, right? But then every industry, every business just goes into this dormancy, and it lies there, and it lies there as an infant. And just like an infant, it can't get up and go to college. You have to keep feeding it and changing the diapers. And every now and again, you'll get a giggle out of it. But it's just the most horrible phase. And that's when most entrepreneurs give up on their ideas. But if you can get through that and keep it alive, it'll start toddling, which is when the magazines are writing articles about you, and your first true believers are all telling all their friends. And that's really a cool phase. And that'll quickly go into the youth phase, which is the best of every business. You've got consistent orders, production's working, sales and administration's working, and everything's clicking, the warehouse is working, and you can run a $20-30 million company in that phase. But if it is a really great product or a really great service, you got to hit the teenage years. And do you remember when, as a teenager, you wanted to be at every party on a Saturday night?
Yeah.
Well, it's identical in business. You want to be in every major trade show, and you want to be in every mass retailer. And it's just suicidal to try and do that and go so fast, because it'll strip out your capital. And I've seen so many businesses go bankrupt through their success because they weren't ready for it. And so then it becomes mature. So the bottom line is that book turned out to be a really, really great book. And everybody kept saying, Brian, you should be talking about this from the stage, So I eventually switched careers after, I had another career in between my speaking, and after I sold the company, but I've come to absolutely love speaking. I really, my stories are really inspirational, motivational. And I have so many entrepreneurs come up afterwards and go, oh my God, Brian, I was going to give up my business, but now I understand the phase I'm in. I'm going to keep at it and go. And that's really, really heartwarming. And that's why I love speaking so much.
That's amazing, Brian. What a great story. I mean, so you said you went back to all of these surf shops. They said, hey, it's good, and it'll be good in the shoe stores. What was it you said? And hey, eventually we, like you said, you just keep persevering. Who was like where was your first win where you're like, oh my gosh, they finally ordered it kicking in?
Yeah, it took a couple of years. Because I started off selling at swap meets and street fairs and things like that. But I had a van, a Dodge van, and I used to go surfing at 6 a.m. at Malibu, and at 8 o'clock I'd get coffee, and I'd open up the back of the van. I had a full inventory in the back of the van. And so I ended up, like what in today's terms it's called a pop-up shop.
Yeah.
I had a pop-up shop 45 years ago in the parking lot of Malibu. And I had this incredible clientele come in, and the rest of that season we did about $6,000 in sales.
Amazing.
And but it was still not much. I thought it'd be way, way better. So I got a summer job, and the next fall I decided, okay, I'm going to advertise. So I got these really good-looking models, a guy and a girl, and posed them on the beach at Sea in La Jolla with perfect hair and perfect clothing, and the UGG boots were like this major part of the ad. And I ran that in October, November, December in the surf magazine and stuff, and the sales went to about 10,000. And I couldn't figure it should have been way, way more. So got another summer job, and then this year I got better-looking models and a more expensive photographer, and we went down to La Jolla to the beach again at Sea, and posed them on the beach with a perfect sunset and everything. And the sales that year went to like 20,000, and it should have been way, 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 way more. And so I had to get another summer job, and this year I was working on a golf course in East San Diego, and that season I decided, I'm just going to go out of business. It's too hard. Americans don't understand sheepskin. It's an expensive product. The retailers can't really afford to stock it. And so I planned to just close out all of the product and get out of business. But in October, the first storm always hits California, and Californians just switch. Oh, it must be winter, right? They're just crazy like that. And so I got home this afternoon, and I was soaking wet from this storm, and the phone had about 25 messages on it, and it was all the surf shop retailers going, Brian, God, it's been crazy here today. Everyone's in here asking for UGG boots. I've run out. I need more. And like the bottom line is I couldn't even go out of business properly, because the demand was so strong by all of these guys. So I ordered a bunch more from Australia, and I gave all the surf shops everything I had. And this time, though, I decided, well, if I'm going to stay in business, I got to figure out this advertising. So I ended up having a beer with one of my surf shop retailers, and I was explaining this problem of advertising, how I just wasn't getting the mark, And he just says, shut up, Brian. And he calls out back to all these little 12, 13-year-old grommets, who hang their surfboards in, And he said, what do you guys think of Uggs? And every one of them just went, oh, those Uggs, man, they're so fake. Have you seen those ads? Those models, they can't surf. And like instantly I realized I'm sending the wrong message to my target market. And I was literally embarrassed when I saw it in their eyes. I was embarrassed at how bad these fake ads were, Thought it was all about the product. And so I switched gears again, and I called up a buddy of mine who was, you probably know this name, Pete Townend. He was a former world surf champion.
Yeah.
Little Aussie guy.
I do, and
he was running the Scholastic Surf Association. I said, Pete, you got any young kids, who are going to go pro soon? Because I got no money, but I can pay them in UGG boots, And so he gave me two guys, Mike Parsons and Ted Robinson. And this time, instead of hiring a photographer, I just took my little Canon Sure Shot, and we went surfing at Black's Beach in La Jolla and Trestles up in San Onofre. And these are iconic walks. They're about a mile to get to the water. There's always fantastic surf there. And so I just figured, well, maybe all these kids who read Surfer Magazine would fit in this photo, And so I ran those, just selected a couple of photos walking to and from the beach. And when I ran those ads in October, November, December, the sales went to $220,000.
Wow.
And the lesson I learned, and this is also part of, like my book's full of all these dumb lessons that took me years to learn. But if you read it, it'll save you a lot of time if you're starting out in a business. But what I learned is you never advertise the product. In the ads I was running, the boots were like half the page, right? The photos I used of Mike Parsons, on a page that big, the boots, you could hardly see them. But what happened is every little kid who reads Surfer Magazine would just die to be walking along that road with Mike Parsons or Ted Robinson, And so the rule is that you never advertise your product. You advertise the features and the benefits. So I figured out what it took to want all these little kids to be in this ad, and it created a cult in the youth surf market. And if you didn't have a pair of UGG boots at Laguna High when you were 14 or 15 years old, you were just not cool. And there's the other angle is that kids don't have $80 to spend on a pair of boots, but they can whine really good. Mom, all the kids at school have got UGG boots. I don't know, So mom ends up, buying them at Christmas time, and that really was the beginning. The beginning of the success of UGG took 4 years for me to figure out that formula.
That's amazing. That is such a great story. And it's to our listeners, they might just be like, well, duh, like obviously, but when you're along the journey as an entrepreneur, like you said, you felt stupid. You were like, I can't believe I didn't see this before. But that's what we do. We make the assumptions. Like my mentor, his name was Joe Ritchie. He often talked about how common sense is not common practice. That was the way I characterized what he always talked about, but he called it dumb smart. He would say people take for granted the thing that's in front of everyone. And so like a lot of times, like you said, to actually like advertise and communicate the utility, the value to the person or the values or the identity or the narrative that's authentic, that's different. Yeah.
I mean, if you wrote a software that saved, users all this time, the last thing you advertise is an engineer at the computer and, the samples of the product. You advertise some guy in the Bahamas drinking rum drinks with all the time he's saving.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
complete switch. Anyway, I talk a lot about branding from the stage when I get a chance. Your brand is not your trademark, and it's not your it's not your logo. Your brand is what your customers think of you. And I have a whole series of stories about branding, which I talk about from the stage.
Oh, Brian, that's such a great way to communicate it. So for the listeners, one more time, what's the name of your book that you wrote, and where can they find it? Is it on Audible? Can
Yes.
they listen?
Yeah.
The Birth of a
I
Brand
actually,
by Brian
The Birth
Smith.
of a Brand.
Mhm.
And I actually did an Audible version about 2 years ago. So if you don't like reading, you can download it from Audible.
Amazing.
And
Or if you're like
it's
me and you just don't have a lot of time to sit and read, but you can like be driving and listening to a book or on a plane, like multitasking.
yeah.
I mean, I'll be doing dishes or doing laundry or running on the beach and getting
Yeah.
exercise.
And
Yeah.
it's a really fast read, I think, mostly because the readers are never going to be sure I'm going to be around next chapter, because I talk about all of the disasters that I did. Thank God the product was so good because it saved me through all of my disastrous decisions. And I made some good ones, but I always figured it out in the end.
Yeah. Well, Brian, it's very evident to me that you had the humility to, as you use the word, that we currently have coined, but pivot. Like you could have just been, these kids don't know what they're talking about. They're stupid. You could have made a posture of making everyone else wrong. You know what? Nobody understands stuff that us Australians, who are so much more superior than Americans, which by the way, I might agree with. But you know what I mean? Like, you could come up with a narrative that would just negate the evidence in front of you. Like I recently put a television show that I think is an awesome idea. It's a TV show I'm producing with a group of my friends called Made. And the concept is about artists and craftsmen, and kind of think like Chef's Table, but for like the best samurai sword maker in the world, or the best knight hat miller, or, the best ukulele.
That sounds really good.
Yeah, it's a fun show. And we had celebrities who are willing to come in the show and that are genuine fans of these master craftsmen. And the show's made, you learn how they were made as people as you learn how they make their craft. And these are like, a lot of them are indigenous that are like buying craft, a didgeridoo maker, something from the Aboriginal community where, it may not carry on through to the next generation in a world of fast fashion and fast making. And but in this case, that heartfelt making is just a great thing. So
long story short, we met through this guild.
And the audience was a really conservative group. There's 60,000 people, but they're highly faith driven. And the feedback, I had one of the makers, he goes, I don't believe in heaven or hell. I just try to be better every single day. Well, my spiritual purview is really open aperture. And I'm like, I totally believe that, everybody has their walk with God, call that. And I believe that there's like, you look for the light, you look for the good, you accept people from where they're at, and you just meet them where they're at. And so, but some of the audience was like, yeah, I don't see how this is an edifying. Yeah, I got in this posture where I was like, they don't know what they're talking about. That's so ignorant, But then I realized, I have to understand my audience. Like I have to understand how to better communicate that, that a person's getting the same values.
Ironically, there's a lot of spirituality and philosophy in my book.
Oh,
because
great.
I took, for every disaster, there was a learning experience, right? The philosophy of the real world based on the mistakes that I made. And I can remember being terrified like about a year and a half ago when I decided I'm going to talk about this from the stage, right? And I started talking, God's not out there at the end of the universe. I really believe there's a fragment or a spark or a spirit inside every single one of us. And it has some direction it wants to take us, right? And every time we do something that's in alignment with that, it gives us a message. And that's why I talked about goosebumps a couple of times earlier. That's my spirit telling me, hey, Brian, you're on the right track, And I challenge the audience after that, next time you get the goosebumps, and they all do, because I used to ask, put your hands up if you do, but everybody does. So when you get them, just stop for a second and think, what did I just think? What did I just do? Who did I just meet? There'll be something that you can identify that is sort of meaningful in the ongoing daily pursuit of life, So I've always been a very, very strong believer in God and the spirit inside me. And so to talk about it from the stage the first time I was so scared because I thought, I'd get rocks thrown at me or something. But I couldn't believe how many people came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh my God, Brian, thank you for talking about the spirit. It's really central to my life." And so it's now given me permission to take that out and expand on it. So it's,
That's amazing.
I mean, life is a lot more than your business, right? Business is what you do in the meantime to pay the rent, but you're really living your life every day. And the more you can find the strength or, the meaning or a direction from within, that's when you're really enjoying a good life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Brian. Jordan Peterson says your life isn't, drinking margaritas on a beach somewhere. Those moments are wonderful and they come, but they're few and far between. It's the way your spouse greets you at the door. It's the time you spend at the dinner table with your family. It's the interactions in the day to day with your colleagues at work, or even just like how you wake up and experience the world, your way of being. That if you get those things right, you can really put your life together. And I do believe that it's really cool to see that more and more people have an open heart to hear, as long as we're not shoving our beliefs down anyone's throat and we're not making them wrong, that there's space for people to be who they are and express their humanity and say, this is what I believe. This is what I'm about. I mean, who could ever fault you for saying, I believe that, God, there's a divine spark in me. Like, that's your experience and you're sharing your heart.
And I don't use religion as a benchmark. It's pure, spirit right through. And, so there's no controversy. That's what I was a little bit worried about, but there was no controversy whatsoever.
Yeah.
Everybody just got it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And even those who maybe wouldn't use like the term God, they understand the human experience of an inner knowing and an inner, like my friends, I have one of my best friends is the atheist, and she understands intuition and connection to like our higher self or whatever, some source of love or some benchmark of the ideal. So I think
beautiful.
That's really inclusive what you're saying. I love it. So
Yeah.
Brian, you sell your company. It's funny. I got to tell you this fun story. So this is going to be an embarrassing name drop, but I've worked with Kevin Bacon, the actor, right? So and actually his wife is going to be on our show, Kira Cedric, here in a few weeks, and I've worked with him in his charity in different capacities and supported his nonprofit work for years. And he told me the story where he talked about something got brought up about Uggs. I don't remember why. I might have been wearing them or something, but he said, how that got really famous in Hollywood? He goes, somebody on set, some producer had a bunch of celebrities be like, hey, when you walk from your trailer to the set and it's muddy in California, slip on these easy to slip on and off, boots, these sheepskin boots that are Uggs. And then quickly, like the celebrities were like, we're taking photos of them wearing them, paparazzi and people. And it was like, that's what the cool kids do. And so his perception of how Uggs became famous was that like celebrities were using it for their utility. And then it became who wore them, a little bit what you described with these athletes, and I'm sure that's a slight characterization, but it was like really funny from his perspective.
There's a good backstory to that. Do you want to hear it?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
I'm going to mention this on stage. It is in my book because it's a really important, marketing lesson, right? So I figured out how to get to the surface, right? It wasn't long. I started the same method of getting into snowboard and skiing, going into the youth, right? Because snowboarding was just like, the new youth coming through, and nobody knew what to do with them, right? And it was pretty big. I figured out back east, all the kids, they don't surf or snowboard, but they play hockey. And I figured out how to get into the hockey magazines, the youth hockey in Minneapolis, and we ran Mum of the Week competitions, and again the youths are saying, all the best skaters have got Ugg boots, and so the moms in the malls going, well, these are pretty nice. I might get some for myself because I got to sit in that rink at 40 degrees all the time, right? So that's where Ugg was at, and I knew we needed a bigger image, and so I was sitting on a plane coming home from somewhere back east, and the girl next to me was reading People magazine and Us magazine, and I'm watching her flick the pages, and I'm looking at all these celebrities walking around Hollywood and they're naming what clothes they're wearing. And I said, I wonder how I can get into that market. And I was mentioning it to my buddy Doug, who, the guy was on the beach with me when we conceived the idea. And he said, "Oh, you should go after the stylists." And I said, "What the hell are stylists?" And he goes, "Well, in Hollywood, they have the makeup artists, the hair department, the clothing department. They're all stylists." And so I did a bit of research and I found a mailing list of 4,000 stylists in Hollywood. And I wrote them all, and I just wrote this blanket letter. I said, "If you want a free pair of UGG boots, contact me." And about 400 people did.
Wow.
Right? And no, take that back. 40 people. It was 4,000 stylists, 40 people. And so I just sent 40 pairs of boots out, right? And bit by bit, I'd be watching a sitcom, and there would be, some starlet, wearing UGG boots.
Yeah.
And then they got in the Grumpy Old Man movie, and what's his name? Patrick Swayze was on set, and so bit by bit, Hollywood started picking it up, and eventually these stylists, all the stylists started coming at me for free product, and well, who's it for? Well, I'm doing so, and so it. From Kevin Bacon's perspective, he knew nothing about the prior 15 years of surfing and snowboarding and hockey. He just saw them in Hollywood and decided, oh my God, these are new. This is great, But it took a lot of work to get that, and it was a very deliberate strategy to get into Hollywood. And boy, once, I'll tell you, the thing that changed the company around was one photo, but I'm going to give you a backstory because now I got this image. I want to get it all over the country, right? And I thought, how can I do that? And I thought, I want to be on the center section of the lifestyle page in USA Today. Remember that newspaper? Right?
Yeah.
It was the biggest circulation in the US at the time. And so we had plenty of money, and the UGG's doing about 11, 12 million in sales by now. And I went over to Boston and hired a PR agency, and I put together this whole package and a press kit and everything. And I'd made an appointment with the fashion editor at USA Today in Chicago, like for 3:00 one afternoon. And so we eventually practiced our pitch all the way across, and we finally arrived at Chicago in USA Today's offices. It's 2:55, right? And we announced ourselves, and Margaret comes running out going, "Oh, Brian, I'm so sorry. I've made this huge blunder. I've double booked. I have to be in this meeting." And I just oh my God, I'd put 60 grand into this campaign, and it was now just lost because my pitch was 45 minutes. And so I did this amazing bit of pivoting, right? Some instinct made me reach into my briefcase, and I pulled out a tatty old green folder, like one of these things, right? And I had all these photographs that people had sent me from all over the world of celebrities wearing UGG boots, Tom Petty and Sting, Neil Young, and it went through, and I'm showing her all these photographs, and then suddenly she zeroed on one, and she says, "Who's that?" And I said, No, you can't use that. And it was a tabloid from London. Someone had sent me. It was Pamela Anderson on the set of Baywatch in a red swimsuit and big, tall UGG boots, right? And she wrote down the name of the photographer and the name of the tabloid, and gone, like 4 minutes, she was gone. And I just realized, shit, we just blew that, So next morning, I'm at the airport in Chicago, and I got my coffee, and I got a copy of USA Today. Like, I'm expecting nothing because this was like, 15 hours later.
Yeah.
And I through the main section, and then I flicked through the money section, and on the next page, front and center, is that shot of Pamela Anderson. And when it was about, and when you open up the next page, it was the entire page was nothing but sheepskin, shearling, the history of fashion in wool, all of all the stuff that I'd given her, all of my competitors, which sort of bummed me out at the time. But, and by the time I got back to San Diego, I found that the phones had not stopped all day from consumers
Wow.
wanting to know where the retailer in my area,
Yeah.
and from retailers going, what the hell are these UGG boots? I've got all the people in the store asking for UGG boots. Well, I don't even know what they are, And so that one fluke, right? It was an
Yeah.
absolute fluke, changed the course of the business. And that's when it went really, completely across America. And
Amazing.
UGG was a household name after that.
That's incredible. What year was that, Brian? When did it have that tipping point?
That was 1994.
1994. That is amazing.
Yeah, and I sold the business in 95. That plus one other fluke that I'll tell you if you want.
Yeah.
Was what really launched the company. The other fluke was like, it's karmic. I believe in karma. You put out stuff, you get the equivalent back, right? Good and bad.
Yeah.
And for years I'd been shipping all these boots to like 20 different people in London and England, at the request of this girl, Trudy. And it was a pain in the butt because it also required separate customs invoices. And it was right in the worst time of our shipping season when we were the busiest. But I did it anyway because it was Trudy Styler, who was the wife of Sting. And I wanted to be part of that cool, movement. And she called me up this year and said, "Oh, Brian, I need the biggest favor. I've just been to a seminar. It's changed my world. I need a most perfect gift. Can you find the most perfect pair of tall sand size something Uggs? And here's where to send it. Do you have a pen?" I go, "Yeah." She goes, "Oprah, care of Oprah Winfrey show in Chicago, right?" And so when Oprah got them, she immediately ordered 20 more pairs for all her immediate staff. And then that began the dialogue as we moved into me selling the company. I didn't have the financing to take that worldwide. Like I knew if we announced her, remember, you can't give birth to adults.
Yes.
You can't go from infant to teenager. You'll crash and burn, right?
Yeah.
So I had to work with the new company that I sold UGG to and make sure they had the financing, the production ready. And it took about 2 seasons. And then when we announced Oprah, we were on Oprah's favorite things for 2 sessions, and Oprah's best picks for Christmas. It was like 28 minutes of nothing but UGG when Oprah was at her absolute peak. And she created a societal shift worldwide that took it both male and female, black and white, took it all over the world. And that's the beginning of UGG getting into the hundreds of millions and eventually the billions, because it's been over 2 billion the last couple of years, and it's been 1 billion for over 7 or 8 years now. So and that was, it was luck or a fluke, but then so was sending product out to the stylist, that luck or a fluke, and life's all about that. It's taking a chance and not knowing the outcome and experimenting. And for every one that worked, there were 20 that didn't work. So, that's the beauty. That's the beauty of my book.
That's amazing. I'm sure your book talks about this, but as an entrepreneur who's lived so much, people see oftentimes the tip of the iceberg, the success, and they think, well, how did they do it? I mean, the sport of entrepreneurship is such a high contact sport. There's so many unbelievable,
Yeah, putting it.
Like as a surfer, it's like my son getting, he's been thrashed in those waves and crushed along the reef, and he's had mouthful of salt water and broken bones, you know what I mean? And all the things that go with trying to advance yourself in a sport. And entrepreneurship is exactly the same. And you do have to have this appetite for failure, this appetite for ridicule, this appetite for burnt relationships and disappointments. And that's been the hardest part of the journey as an entrepreneur for me, because I care so much about what people think. And part of that's from insecurity. Part of it's actually just because I love people. I care about them. So their opinion matters, So when misunderstandings happen or things don't go well, tremendous amounts of personal accountability, and not everybody has the aperture for that accountability. And so relationships don't always continue. But for the most part, I've had mostly beautiful relationships in my career. Most of them are amazing, but the few that didn't go well, some of them I felt like, man, I got to cut that person out of my purview. But for the most part, because they're toxic. But for the most part, like anybody that I've disappointed, that haunts me, But I think that's the cost of all the treasured relationships I have along the way.
It is. It
You
is.
know?
And the some of the philosophy from my book is and one that's applicable to what you're just saying is that nearly always your most disappointing disappointments become your greatest blessings.
Totally.
And I asked the audience, who in the last 12 months had something happen at the time you thought was disastrous, and now you look back and think, thank God that happened because I'm in such a better place now. I would say 80 to 90% of the people put their hand up because it's just such a timeless. You don't learn from all the good things that work. You learn from things that don't. And even in relationships, as you were just saying, a bad relationship, cut it off. And, the benefits come after that. You don't have to deal with that anymore. And my other favorite piece of philosophy in the book, and this is timeless for every entrepreneur and even sophisticated business people who are introducing a new product line or a new element of something, or even if you're just trying to get a new system over to your employees, right?
Yeah.
And that saying is the quickest way for a tadpole to become a frog is to live every day happily as a tadpole, right? It sounds a bit trite, but I bet your listeners in 1 year, they've forgotten most of what I talked about today, but they'll remember, the quickest way for a tadpole to become a frog is live every day happily. And that's the key word, happily, as a tadpole. Because if you just keep doing what you're doing and it's good, eventually you won't even know that time's passed, and you look back and go, oh my God, look what I built. And that's what I do with art.
True. That's beautiful. Well, thank you for that incredible insight. As I think one of the things that I've learned too along my journey is that people would say that like the worst things happen to you or the best things happen to you. They'd have these platitudes. And when you're in the middle of suffering, like when you're in the middle of something really hard, you can't hear that. It's like you are in too much pain for anyone to say, this is the best, let's celebrate. You have to go through and be honest about and mourn and grieve and process all the difficulty that life, the trials of life can, afford. And then at the end, you can actually actively have that silver lining, that gratitude, because you can see the through line of value. You know what I mean?
You just spurred me to talk about one more piece of philosophy.
Please. I love it.
I have these mantras. I read this in a book over 25 years ago. And it was so profound that I typed them out, 4 little mantras, and I put them in the front of my daily planner. In fact, this is my daily planner. In the front of that is this quote. It's feast upon uncertainty, fatten upon disappointment, invigorate in the presence of difficulties, and enthuse over apparent defeat. And they've been on my refrigerator for years as well. No matter what happens in your personal life or your business life, if you can feast, fatten, enthuse, the quicker you do it, the better the circumstances will change. If you spend a week going, oh, poor me, why me? Why did this happen to me? The world's not fair. I hate these people. You'll just wallow in that disappointment and uncertainty. But if you can take it head on, feast upon, uncertainty, fatten upon disappointment, enthuse over apparent defeat. These will turn your attitude around so fast. And I mean, I've got to the point now where if something goes really bad, I go, God damn it, that's good. Now, what's good about it? And I'm really, yeah, what's good about it? And the quicker you go into positive motion, the quicker the solution will come. But if you want, you can wallow in your misery for months and months and months. And I know a lot of people who do that. They won't move on. They just, that guy screwed me and I'm not doing this again. I hate this. But, the longer you do that, the less likelihood you've ever got to survive.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I viscerally, I know that's true. And there's been times in my life based on capacity, situation, all that I have made the fatal mistake of the unbecoming self-loathing or nurturing of the disappointments. And yeah, it bears no good fruit. It just sucks from you the beauty and the value of today. And, we have to have compassion for ourselves because, like, you know, I was there at that time. But recently I had a disappointment last year. I worked for 10 months and there's some other people involved that were wonderful people I all cared about. We were putting together this big project, this big music. I put on music festivals and concerts and produced these big, large scale
Right.
events. It was televised and we are putting all this together with all this talent. Everything was going well. The money was there. It didn't work out. And I remember I was driving. It was my son's birthday. We were driving along the coast here on the North Shore, and because I didn't want to read my text, but I saw that my text was being blown up by some of the people I work with. So I asked my 15-year-old son to read it for me, to be like my seeing eye dog while I was driving. And he reads, "Oh, mom, they, you know," he calls me mom because my husband calls me mom to the boys. So he says, "Mom, this is bad news." And he reads it, and they say the project fell over, and it wasn't any fault of our own. It had to do with external situations that we could control. And that sometimes that makes it even more painful because you're like, oh, like we did everything right. It just does feel unfair, like universally unfair. But like anyway, I remember feeling like, all right, I'm gonna give myself the next 10 minutes till we get home in this car to nurse my wounds, and then I'm done. And then I'm gonna, you know what I mean? And I gave myself like a timeline of being like, oh, that sucks so bad. That was so much energy and time and money and relationships and reputation and all these things. I got home and I was like, this is happening for me, not to me. And I just changed my thinking, right? And then the most beautiful things came out of it. My job at Capita, which has been the best thing that ever happened to me professionally. You know, so I'm now in this sweet spot where I get to pour into people and take people around the world and do the philanthropy I was doing before at scale I never could, because I'm able to just
Right.
be in such a better position. And it directly came from the failure of that experience. So because I had to pivot and then new opportunities come. So I'm so with you. Like, you know, at the end of the day, even if it's not true, even if like our lives had been better, had it all worked out the first instance or whatever,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
live better. I know this to be true, that my life is better when I fixate on love and gratitude and beauty.
Yeah.
I see what's coming in around me as a gift. My life just is qualitatively better. That I know. And so why not? You know what I mean? So I love what you're saying. It resonates with me at a core level, Brian. I was just going to say, we're here at the top of the hour. Is there any last comment you want to share with the listeners of something that you say?
Well,
I love you give some great,
the most common question I get after I finish my talks on stage, because I don't put this in my talk, but we have Q&A, and they say, you know, Brian, why did you sell your business? And now you see that it's in the billions. You're resentful that you did that. And the answer is no. I sold at the perfect time because I'd never understood financing well, so I was always at the mercy of the producers of the product, you know, with the payment terms and everything, and I was really stifling the growth. And I remember we just had this season with about 15 million in sales, but the preseason orders looked like the next year was going to be 25 million. And I knew I didn't have a hope in hell of financing that. And so I was trying to figure out what to do. And I was on my way to a trade show in Atlanta called the Super Show. It was a big athletics show. And way up the other end of the baggage claim was this guy called Doug Otto. And do you remember my story about the parking lot at Malibu?
yes.
A couple of spaces up, this guy Doug Otto was selling these triple-decker flip-flops, right? You know, pink, yellow, and pink neoprene flip-flops. And over the year, we saw each other on the on the road all the time, in and out of surf shops, and we were good friends. And anyway, he went on to get the license for Teva sandals. And when the outdoor market took off in the early 90s, his company just went through the roof, you know, from like 12 million to 60 million. And he took his company public. And now I see him at the other end of baggage claim, and man, I got the biggest dose of goosebumps that I've ever had, because I went, oh my God, it's perfect. I knew he had about $28-30 million in the bank, and his company died every winter. Our company died every summer. And I knew if we put them together, it'd be a brilliant business. So we high-fived each other, and we had the accountants talking that afternoon about how do we get started merging these two companies.
Brilliant.
And as for resentment, I have none at all. I am so proud of the brand.
Yeah,
and
you should
if
be.
you remember, if you remember the theme of the book, which is you can't give birth to adults, I'd conceived the idea. We bought the samples. That was the birth. It went through its infancy, like 3 years, me failing at advertising, and then eventually started modeling, and then got into the youth, and I'd taken it all the way, plus 10, 15 million into the teenage years, and I knew I am not the right person to take this out into the billions. And so when I met Doug, it was like handing my business off, like walking my daughter down the aisle and handing it off to the new husband who could take it out into the world and make it big and have babies, and that's what they've done. They've done a brilliant job in taking it into the billions. So I am, every time I walk through the airport and I see someone, I always look behind to make sure it's the UGG brand, So
Exactly.
really proud of that whole business.
We're big fans of the product. So thrilling to meet you, Brian, and from one Aussie to another. Thanks for being on the show. I'm an honorary Aussie. I never even got citizenship, but I love it. I love that you came on, and thank you so much for coming on. Have a wonderful week.
Hey, my pleasure. You too.
Do you need help with the next steps for your financial plan? Think Capita. Capita is a financial network built around you. They have a team of financial advisors, CPAs, estate attorneys, Medicare providers, and Social Security experts to help you accomplish your financial goals. Call to schedule a complimentary consultation at 801-566-5058 or visit their website at www.capitafinancialnetwork.com. You can also check out their financial education podcast, The Financial Call, available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and YouTube.